Turning everything on now. Okay, so good morning, good afternoon, good evening, or for our Australia colleagues in the middle of the night. I am Stanka Willis, president of the Marine Technology Society. Along with MTS, these dialogues are being sponsored by the Global Ocean Observing System, or GOOS, and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA. And it is a recognized Ocean Decade action. We welcome you and sincerely appreciate you joining us for the first of 4 dialogues with industry. Next slide, please. This past June, the Department of Commerce released a report stating that the America's blue economy contributed to $361 billion of the nation's gross domestic product in 2020 across 10 sectors, representing businesses dependent on the nation's oceans, coast, and Great Lakes. The top 5 sectors in sales included tourism and recreation, defense and public administration, offshore minerals, transportation, fisheries, and other bioproducts. Another way to look at this is the NOAA USIU study that evaluating the growth of businesses in the ocean enterprise in the United States. This first study was completed in 2015 and the second study in 2020. The study showed that revenue grew from $7 billion in 2015 to $8 billion in 2020, and the number of businesses grew by almost 60% for a total of 814. Canada has done a similar study, and their draft results are also showing upward trends. Adding this to the 2 bullets on the slide, it translates to a growing demand for ocean information, as well as a growing pool of partners that can meet this demand. This represents a change in paradigm, and it's what we're here to talk about. Next slide. So the planning team has tried to craft these dialogues differently. And instead of a single panel or a session at the many ocean venues and projects, which are all important, we have spent quite a bit of time curating these 4 dialogues that will build on each other. We are looking to hear from you on actionable recommendations, and our moderator is going to continue to push you in that direction. We also wanted to ensure a representation from the different sectors of government, intergovernmental, private, and academia, as well as different disciplines, scientists, engineers, finance experts, and legal experts. We have limited the participation of who can interact verbally with our moderator for logistical reasons, but we are really hoping that everyone will participate in enriching the conversation for those of you with the Q&A button, which you can use like a chat function. Next slide, please. The ocean information value chain is used as a concept to illustrate how ocean observations are converted through a wide variety of interactions, transformations, and service delivery mechanisms to products that have value to decision makers and business leaders, and thus impact to society. Taking the value chain approach allows us to illustrate the importance of ocean information and related services. The diagram you see is combining the ocean information value chain and the ocean enterprise. It shows the different elements of the value chain and provides the content they cover in more detail. It also shows the partners in the value chain that interconnect to deliver information to end users, who in turn derive socioeconomic and economic benefits from the information products. Private and public organizations, as well as public-private partnerships on local, national, regional, and global levels, can contribute to any number of these elements according to the nature of their organization. Today, we're focused on the left-hand side of the value chain, the provisioning of observation technologies, or the producers, the manufacturers of technologies enabling ocean observations and measurements. We appreciate that the businesses that we have represented today likely categorize themselves in multiple components along this value chain. But as I said earlier, we are looking for these dialogues to build upon each other, and we will discuss all of the elements of these of this diagram through our 4 dialogues. So today's session is going to touch on 3 overarching topics that you see on the screen. Next slide. So, I'm sorry, Monica, it should be Chris's slide. There you go, and then we'll go back. So I am really pleased to introduce Chris. You see his short bio on the screen, but it's also important to note that Chris began his career in ocean observing. He was the founding director of the Pacific Islands Ocean Observing System, or PAC-IUS, one of the 11 regional associations of the U.S. Integrated Ocean Observing System. But he also participated on the national stage as a member of the IUS Federal Advisory Committee. So once again, thank you for participating, and I really look forward to a robust conversation. Chris, over to you.
Thanks, Stanka, for the kind introduction. It's my pleasure to join everyone today, and I too look forward to a robust and collegial conversation. For our invited participants, we ask you to keep your video on during the discussion and invite you to use the raise hand feature so I can call on you to share your thoughts with the group. In some cases, I may direct a question at a particular participant or a group of participants. I also encourage you to open the Q&A box on your screen so you can see the comments and questions that come in from the audience, and you can layer in your own comments to what has been submitted. Please note that you will not be able to initiate your own thread in the Q&A box, but you can verbalize any questions you see from that group by raising your hand. In the interest of time, I'm not going to be introducing each of our invited participants. Rather, I'd ask each of you to tell folks your name, your role, and your organization when you speak for the first time. For our audience participants, you are able to listen to the conversation and submit written comments in the Q&A for everyone to see. You can also layer in comments and feedback to the questions posted by everybody else. During the last 30 minutes of our session, we will invite you to participate in open discussion. You'll need to use the raise hand feature and I'll call on you. We have a large audience today and it's unlikely I'll be able to get to everyone, so I ask for your patience and understanding up front. For everybody, please keep your microphone on mute when you are not speaking. As Stanka mentioned, our conversation today is divided into 3 sessions. We've set aside roughly 35 minutes for questions and discussion in each session, with a 5-minute break between. I'll start each session with a brief primer to set the stage, and we'll work from a series of questions we have prepared to elicit feedback. Please note that the session, the Q&A, and the chat are all being recorded and will be shared publicly. The content of the report, however, that comes after this will not be attributed to any particular participant. All right, let's get started. Our first session is focused on understanding, predicting, and communicating sensor and instrument market needs. The Global Ocean Observing System has grown rapidly and stands to continue exponential growth for years to come. A deeper connection is needed between the public and private sectors to support further maturation of both observing systems and the sensor and instrument market that supports them. The private sector needs to understand what the government and academic funders of observing systems want and will purchase in order to meet stakeholder needs for data and information. And the public sector needs to better understand how industry determines future technology development and service requirements, what investments industry is prepared to make to grow the marketplace, and how best to inform the development of new technologies. And both sectors stand to benefit from an understanding of roles and where the line between public and private responsibility sits. So my first question to get us started, generally speaking, what economic forces do you see that are growing the sensor and platform markets? And feel free to raise your hand and we can get started. Rob, go ahead.
All right. Hi, everyone. Rob Ellison from Seabird Scientific. I manage R&D here. So, I think that the highest level driver of market growth is increasing public awareness of the importance of the ocean, the the seriousness of climate disruption. So that is driving more awareness, which is driving more interest in investment. What's exciting is that we are seeing fairly rapid increase in investment from the private sector. We are seeing gradual increase in the public sector, not fast enough, but I think that's the macro scale driver here. I think when we look at more specific areas, we see a very rapid development in China. China is focused on becoming a world-class leader in ocean technology and ocean science. And so very rapid investment going on there. And then you look at, for Seabird, we see the growth of the Argo program with biogeochemical and debargo programs. And that is obviously having create some opportunities for the sensing industry.
Peter, go ahead.
Yeah, Per Fitzek, Business Development Manager, Ocean Science with Kongsberg Maritime. I think we should address this question by splitting it. And the split would be that there is this sustainability shift that Rob has nicely highlighted. And we see this sustainability shift within the traditional blue economies, right? So we see that there is a more sustainability driver within fisheries, in some parts at least. We see a sustainability aspect in offshore energy with a shift to offshore wind, right? So we see that there is more interest and need to have ocean data available within that part of the things. And then we have that other part, and that is the split, again touched upon by Rob. And this is this consolidation and harmonization and the improvement happening within ocean observing as a standalone entity. So ocean observing not being directly linked to one of these established entities. And I think that is important for our ongoing discussion to understand where is the ocean observing enterprise standalone and how can we grow it as a basically standalone mature market, and where do we provide additional equipment to support the existing blue economies. I just wanted to give that one.
Thanks, Peter. Melinda, and then Tost. Oh, Melinda, you're on mute.
I am sorry. Yes, Melinda Holland with Wildlife Computers, and we manufacture tag instruments that are carried by marine animals primarily. And we do utilize a lot of the same technologies as other people in this audience. What is driving us, as Pierre mentioned, are sustainability issues, and that is how does the ocean environment impact industries such as fisheries management. The recent drop in the crab catch in Alaska is one example. And the other side of what drives us is as the animals are going through the oceans and sampling interesting and often difficult to reach areas, we're including now oceanographic profiles to help combine the animal behavior and response to what the changing climate and profiles are in the oceans.
Excellent, thank you. So we'll get through the next three folks who have their hand raised, and then I want to shift gears with a slightly different question. So Tost, go ahead.
I'm Toste Tanura. I'm a scientist at GEOMAR, Helmholtz Center for Ocean Research in Kiel. And I'm also involved in the Global Ocean Observing System. So a little bit of two hats here. I think the market has to differentiate between the classic market of ocean science and the ocean observing, where we have different requirements on accuracy, precision, and so on. Now, I think the Global Ocean Observing System has tried to articulate that need in terms of essential ocean variables. So we have a set of these key variables that we think we need to measure. We also articulated needs on accuracy, precision, drift, temporal and spatial observings. So that sets the first cornerstones, I would say, in defining a market size. It's not perfect, and we need much more discussion with the end users of these data to refine that. But I think that is a way of looking at it. We, in the ocean observing enterprise, don't always need the highest accuracy precision, but we need that's good enough for the purpose that we're doing these things. That can drive a larger market and then drive down prices and even more increase the market. My short version here is essential ocean variables, and the definition of what we need to measure is important for the market in my point of view, at least from the output side of things. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Yi, and then Natalie, and then I'd like to go a different direction.
Thank you, Yi Chao here. I'm the CEO and founder of SeaTrack, a startup company making energy harvesting system for profiling floats. Just to emphasize what's being said about the drivers, and then seems to me as a scientist turning into a commercialization effort, one of the key drivers for instrumentation is the new emerging science. Some of the challenges scientific community is facing, what are the unmet needs and what cannot be done today. Just to emphasize, reiterate my colleague in the Seabird talk about BGC and Deep Argo. 10 years ago, we've been attending those conferences, talk about those challenges. 10 years later, now you have a BGC Argo is a full-scale program. So thinking about the new science, what is emerging, what is coming up in the next decades. I was attending the eDNA conference early this week. So maybe 10 years from now, there will be an eDNA initiative and fully deployed. So thinking about new science, more communication with the scientific community, with industry, it may be just my take-home message of how to facilitate that kind of communication to understand the drivers and then develop the instrument they need. Thank you.
I'm glad you said that, Yi, and I'm going to pull that out in a little bit. And we're going to come back to that point on the communication between science and industry. Natalie, do you want to finish up this question, and then I'll ask another one?
Yeah, so I'll just add an additional point. I thank all the participants for making those great comments. I think a need right now with this changing of science is the availability of products. You have to be an oceanographer, I think, to understand the Argo data and Argo profiles and just download the data and use it. And that's not the case of most end users, and that's not the case of most of the folks in the industry. So I think there's a growing need for products that are based on ocean data that are easy to use, easy to download, and easy to understand. And there's needs to be, I just based on the paper that was given to us, I think I haven't seen in that paper enough the need for independent assessment of quality control of the data set that has to be separate from provided by the industry. And that's a role that the public sector is making a huge impact on, and that needs to be maintained.
Absolutely. And in sessions 2, 3, and 4, as we continue on the series, we're going to get further into both the data and the product development piece and the data products. But for today on the sensor front, I'd like to go a slightly different direction. Instead of asking what's growing the market, I'd like to ask for our industry partners, what shortcomings do you see, if any, in the sensor and platform market? Are there issues related to market size, i.e., how many gliders can a nation or observing system really buy? And is the potential end user market for some of the highly specialized sensors and platforms too narrow at the moment to generate the revenue needed to enter the marketplace? Go ahead, Graham.
Hi, thank you. I'm Graham Brown, Managing Director of Sanodyne. I generally agree with that. I think we're at the moment niches in certain types of sensing and monitoring type applications for which there may well be established global players in servicing each one of those niches. And so the scale of the market is such that perhaps sometimes people, it may deter new entrants coming into the market because it looks like there's a very established position. I think there's also potential inertia to changing approach. Much ocean observing has been done on established baselines, and then changing the measurement techniques or approaches. You've got to transfer one standard method to another standard method and get those baselines aligned, potentially over long periods. That costs more money. That's an inertia to change, perhaps from the science user perspective, as well as proving a new technology. So so to add to that, you have a sort of considerable effort required to prove any form of new system as a developer or manufacturer of a new technology. So you need to have some confidence of scale of opportunity to direct your efforts into that type of work. Thank you.
Absolutely. Clara, do you want to go ahead? Oh, yeah, Clara, go ahead, or David Velasco.
Yeah, no, actually, Dave Velasco, with Nortech Group. I lead a small team of developers here in San Diego, California. Actually, I think Graham pretty much said exactly what I was going to say, but in summary, yeah, I mean, there's, are there issues related to market size? Yes, absolutely. I mean, if things aren't, I mean, at the end of the day, we need to make sure that we return in, results to shareholders and results to the users of the data and to those who are funding, all of the effort. And, there has to be some monetary and some sort of overview of this. And so if the market is very small, it's not interesting to a lot of companies. And so we have to sort of scale that and have to put that in perspective as well. And it might seem like, well, if you have two or three, a company of 2 or 3 people, then you can do things around very quickly. But the reality is that even what we would call simple technology still takes an extraordinary amount of effort to develop and to make sure that it gets right. And then when we add things such as that, well, it has to be easy to use, affordable, high quality, you can't have it all. So you have to pick, the battles that you can win. And you have to, one of those inputs into that is definitely the market size. If it's not there, even though it might be highly valuable or very desirable to some, if it's not to a large enough mass, it's just very difficult to pursue.
Absolutely. Clara, do you want to go ahead?
Hoping my microphone is working.
We can hear you.
So I'm Clara Halbert. I work for Teledyne Marine, and I'm the product line manager for the Apex profiling floats, and I'm also the commercial sales manager for the Slocum gliders. And the answer is no, there can't be enough gliders in the ocean. Think that. But seriously, of course there can be, and the point that was just made about how difficult it is to develop these technologies, and we're 30 years into the Apex and 20 years into the glider to be where we are. So starting from the beginning, it's tough. And so where I see the growth is in interconnecting vehicle platforms so that you can extend the use of them. And the other place I see is expanding the market. So the data that we're gathering for Hui, we're also gathering for offshore wind. And maybe we're even doing that with a Navy glider. I mean, it's those interconnections that we really have to look at. How do we extend the use of our platforms? And that's the only way I see to really bring the market forces in that we need to get the data we need, because we need a lot of money. And we're simply not going to get that just from government.
Thanks, Clara. Yi, do you want to layer in on this one? Is your hand up from before?
Yeah, thank you. I just want to add a startup perspective especially when a small company need to raise private capital or venture capital funding, VC funding, one of the first question they're going to ask is how big the market is. And then, as many of the speaker pointed out, many of these our market are very niche based and smaller market size compared to the typical VC backed companies. So it's important for organization like the MTS and IUs develop those report not only on the grand blue economy, but also subset of the market size. So people like us, we can quote a credible report rather than trust what the CEO is saying. And they want to see a credible report quantify the subset of the market, like surface vehicle, subsurface vehicle, glider, float, and so forth. So having those report is very quantification of the market size is very important. Thank you.
Thanks, Yi. I'm going to jump around a bit just to make sure I hear from everybody. Andy, do you want to go ahead?
Hello. I think I'm on. I'm Andy Zigweed. I'm with Ocean Arrow, and we are a startup, but we build vehicles that sail and submerge, and are finding there's great need for observations and a multitude and variety of observations. What I find challenging is a lot of the funding mechanisms are really ad hoc science projects. There's little funding for sustained global observations. While there's a need for the data, there's no pull for that. There's no funding behind that. So I see that as one of the challenges. In looking at the market size, it is very much a niche market, and every technology has their advantages. The drivers obviously come down to low cost, yet robust and high quality observations. So there's still, iterative improvement in sensing technologies that we can integrate. But the CapEx is also the problem for organizations to get into the robust platforms that can conduct these sustained observations. So I think a need for funding for sustained global observations is really what we need as an industry to grow this market.
Thanks, Andy. David, how about you? Oh, we cannot hear you, David. No, sorry. Microphone's not working. All right, we'll come back. Toast.
Thank you. So, Andrew, great points. Sustainable systems is really key here, but I would like to bring up another point. I think if we want a large ocean observing system, we need to enable the use of non-research platforms, civil society, merchant ships, and so on, to really go from niche to norm. And to do that, we really need to make, I think, the sensors much more interoperable and standardized, easy to operate, plug and play systems. So I really, would like to see that societies maybe like GOOS or MTS could facilitate that discussion around standards and best practices in actually developing these systems so they can be plug and play and easy to operate. I think both in hardware and in software, communication, input, output, but also in the physical size and how you connect your instruments to vessels. Ultimately, even research vessel or research platforms will benefit from such a development. So I think that is my point here, interoperability and standards. Yeah.
Excellent, thank you. David, let's jump in on this question, and then, sorry folks, I want to go to a different question and go a slightly different way, but please do keep layering in thoughts on the chat. David, go ahead.
Thanks, Chris. I hope this works. My name is David Legler. I work in NOAA. I direct the Global Ocean Monitoring and Observing Program, which sponsors a large fraction of the global ocean observing systems, such as Argo floats. I also chair a group in the GOOS organization, which looks at the coordination across many of the global ocean observing systems and tries to coordinate them. My comment, Chris, is building on some of the other comments and trying to understand the market size. So from a person who sits and sponsors a lot of this, we can provide estimates, sort of foreshadow or estimates of what we think our buying patterns are. And so just trying to get to that question, we've had this discussion, I think, with Pierre in the past, is thinking about that global market. I mean, there are some information we can try to gather, but it's a little unclear how useful that really is, what the granularity of information that would be needed, how long in the future, and things like that. So it's nice to have this discussion, but thinking about the action, it would be helpful if this group could take, offline or something, some guidance to us. We can collect a lot of information if that's helpful, but we would need some help from the industry to figure out what would be most helpful to you all.
Well, I'm really glad you said that, David, because that's actually where I was going to lead in the next question very generally is, as we look at the global landscape, there's several programs and projects and networks that generate requirements for both new instrument and sensor performance, but also the volume of what they need and how many they're willing to buy. For everyone, do we need a larger international effort that captures these forward-looking requirements in a way that can inform industry's development of technology? And if so, how do we do it? And then back to an earlier point, how can we work through the requirements, the data accuracy, the sensor accuracy, the standards, the formats, the biogeochemical characteristics of where these instruments are going to operate? How do we better articulate this to give greater clarity to the producers of new technologies? Pierre, your hand is up. Do you want to jump in on this one?
Certainly. So firstly, we should not focus on the limitations of the market. We are all very well aware of that. We should do that if we were in a stagnating environment, then we should just focus on the efficiencies. However, right now, I see that we are on a growing curve, and this is so nice. So we should try to understand this environment and see how we can build on that. And we still have a long way to go until the market has reached a size equivalent to the actual environmental benefit the ocean processes give to the earth. So there is a lot of room, and I don't know when we will reach it. I want to pick up what David just said, and when he attributed to our earlier discussions, and this is bang on to what you are asking here now. Yes, we need such an exchange with respect to the requirements and with respect to the potential, because the market clarity and plannability is much needed. And that also feeds into what Yi said earlier on, that this is a question that is very often asked by people who want to invest, or entities that want to invest in our environment. So you need that market clarity. So we earlier on suggested to form something introduced as the Ocean Observing Agora, in the sense that we should have a platform where the observational needs and the associated technical demands are publicly available and can be exchanged. So if you were to develop a new sensor, you would go there and see how much interest in that sensor, how often is it used, is actually a monitoring network in search of a certain parameter. And so that could be used to either find existing technology or to stimulate new developments. If you were to ask yourself, what is the a very promising technology that could be developed that is needed a lot, you could go there and see, oh, well, lots of observational systems are seeking sensors for a certain parameter. But underlying to all of that is standardization, best practices, and essential ocean variables. I think we could repeat that throughout the whole session today. This is absolutely mandatory and a must deliver by the scientific and research community. This is the fundament upon which we can only move ahead. It's equally important as hardware standards and data protocols. It's just very important to understand what we talk about, what the requirement levels are, and then we can talk about something like the Ocean Observing Agora. Happy to go into more detail, but that should be it for now.
Thanks, Pierre. Clara? Oh, Your hand is still up if you want to jump in.
So I could not agree more with what was just said. It's so difficult for us to know where to invest. We have so many inquiries daily of great projects, and we don't know which ones are going to carry forward to the future. So what we have to do is say, you've got to put together some sort of a market for us, or demonstrate it, or we simply can't move forward. We can't go in every direction. And then I find something, might be unpopular that I say this, but academia sometimes has a hard time working in a cohesive way. So a great example of that is the Argo program, where they defined a BGC sensor suite, and that was great. We integrated that, fantastic. I have maybe quoted that once and I quoted other suite, probably 45, 50, 60. I mean, no one ever wants the same thing twice. So that leaves us at loose ends, and we don't know which direction to follow. And just one more example. So the Defense Department, they come in and they want gliders, and they order, 200 of the same glider, and they get really low cost, and they get a lot of efficiency, and they get service, and that's what we need in order for us to plan, in order to support. So probably not a popular statement, but that's a true statement.
No, it's awesome. It's absolutely true. Rob, do you want to jump in?
Sure. So yeah, I think the answer is yes, absolutely. The private sector needs reports from the customer base on the market size, the needs, but it is so tightly linked with the standards. As Clara was saying, we have to have some consistency. The more consistency, the more coordination within the scientific community there is on what the need is, the better the private sector can do in delivering that, and delivering it at a lower cost. And I think the Argo program is probably the best example, even though Clara brought up it's not perfect. But the best example of a global consortium working together to try and set not only the hardware standards, but also the data quality and software standards. And I think that's what we need to really focus on. And when the public sector tries to put yourselves in the private sector's heads and understand like how we can better serve you, it's all about, and how we can develop technologies faster. It's all about seeing an opportunity and then shortening the innovation time by reducing the number of variants. And so the number of customers, the number of variants, the number of firmwares, the more the customer base can consolidate and take a platform approach, the better we'll be able to deliver.
I want to pull a thread on that one in a second, Rob, but Natalie, do you want to jump in and close out this question?
Yeah, I think that Rob and Clara basically said what I wanted to say. But I'm an Argo PI, so and a lot of people talked about Argo. So I think Argo is a great example, but there's other ocean observing networks, and I think it's important for a platform or a sensor, in order to be successful and to contribute to the market. It's critical that it's global, and it's international, and it needs to be a consensus within each of the observing networks about not only what are the accuracy or stability requirements, but also to be crystal clear about the parameters of the mission of those programs. How long those sensors or platforms have to stay in the water, what are the mission characteristics, and really maintain the dialogue with the industry.
Excellent, thank you. All right, I'd like to actually go to something that Katie put into a chat with the panelists, and it builds on Rob's comment of, for our industry folks, but also for folks in government and intergovernmental, what market opportunities do you see that are provided by developing cheaper, modular technologies that can be, bought, deployed, and used by more people, by a broader swath of the public, to capture information, as opposed to maybe more highly customized, highly specified equipment that has a narrow market use. David, go ahead.
Definitely, there are absolutely market opportunities out there for that. I think the question, however, is not so simple to address, because a lot of times people associate easy to use, simple technology, that just the general public can use, with something that is simple to develop and quick to develop, and it costs very little to develop. And the reality is that oftentimes it's actually the opposite. If you need to do something that the general public can use, you need to actually make it built in with a lot of intelligence inside of it, so that it can deal with people who are not going to know what they're looking at, who are not going to know how to address the data and shortcomings of it. And so a lot of times making something that is, even though there is definitely absolutely a market for that, it takes as much and sometimes even more time to develop something like, a simple, what we would say, an easy to use or a simple device.
Andy, go ahead, and then Duncan.
All right, I think this is kind of a good question, and I kind of wanted to add it earlier, but I'm glad you brought it up. I'm kind of looking at the market where traditional science observations are on one hand, what we're all supporting with the platforms and the instrumentation, but the market is really growing, and I think we can do great things if we combine the forces. I think that was mentioned before, but combining the observations as there's new needs that are surfacing, such as IUU fishing monitoring, transshipments, trafficking. There's, in my mind, no reason why we couldn't combine the technologies and do the ocean observations while bringing these platforms and technologies to these other markets. So sharing the resources, sharing the funding, sharing the mission requirements, and then sharing the data that's collected on these platforms, even with MCDR or carbon dioxide removal. They all have their own monitoring needs that you can add additional sensors for fisheries monitoring or marine mammals along the way. So I think combining markets is a way to increase the market for global observations.
Excellent. Duncan, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Duncan McTavish with SOFAR Ocean. Yeah, we're a kind of venture-backed company that manufactures lower cost wave buoys. And then we deploy those wave buoys in a global network. And we've seen a lot of opportunity that these sensors are, they're small, they're easy to deploy, and we've seen a lot of interest. We can have these things deployed by researchers, academics, but also by everyday people that are using these sensors to get insights on the waves and ocean conditions outside their backyard. So we've seen, a lot of benefits from building a sensor that can be used by everyone.
Carl, and then Rusty, and then Rob, I'll get to you, but I want to bring some new folks in too.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Carl Goldman, the director of the U.S. Integrated Ocean Observing System Office within NOAA, National Ocean Service. I also wear a GOOS Regional Alliance Chair hat some days and work with David on implementing the Global Ocean Observing System by looking at how our national systems can coordinate regionally and contribute into the global system. So a massive challenge for us all is how to figure out how to take advantage of the innovations that are happening at such a pace that the government side, where we are funding and trying to field observing systems on a sustained basis, are not very fast to be able to take on a new capability programmatically and wire that into the programmatics we have. But we need to be taking the risks to do so and figure out ways to do that. So I really appreciate this conversation. What I'm hearing about the low-cost sensor opportunities is that there's a good marriage between our ocean observing practitioners that are non-private sector, like the ICE regional associations in the United States, whose job it is to understand the customer needs at local and regional scales. And sensors like SOFARs, sensors like low-cost water level sensors, you know, how to bring those in and fit them in with the program of record that might have a much more expensive sustained capability like the National Water Level Observation Network within NOAA. And what I'm hearing is that there's a marriage there that makes sense to have the observing practitioners that can help with the standards and the data management, and the local and regional need community decision makers don't care about the federal program receiving those data or not, but they see high value in those data. They don't care if the resolution and the certainty is as high as the highest quality, because they have a scale and a temporal need that's clear to them. But they need a trusted agent that can teach them and show them how to use the new capability, because they don't want to just trust a private sector entity who's saying they can do that. So there's a wedding between an expert analysis and doing some evaluation and the people who might be able to do the data acceptance and QA/QC at a certain level. And then in the ICE structure, we're finding that then we can do the work of getting the partner data into the national federal networks as well, and try to become more facile at taking on those other data types from the different data sensor, precision levels. So that's a way that we've got to figure out how to do that on a more rapid basis and figure out what that means and communicate the market opportunities there and figure out how to create demonstrations and competitions, I think, to allow faster innovation on that kind of front.
Excellent. Thanks, Carl. In the interest of time, I know we're coming up on a break. I'm going to ask Rusty to jump in and comment on this, and then we're going to take a short break and we're going to move on to our second session. So Rusty, go ahead.
Cool. Thanks, Chris. My name is Rusty. I'm from Blue Robotics. We manufacture low-cost components for marine robotics. And I think we see a lot of the effects of making low-cost components and systems available. It enables a lot more people to get into this industry, and particularly allows people to innovate. They can try something that would be cost prohibitive in the past. The challenge is, and I think what David mentioned, was that it's often more difficult to make something low cost, especially while maintaining the quality that this industry typically demands. And then going back to what Yi said earlier, it's very difficult to evaluate what the market size might be. There's not very much information about that. It's very niche markets. So from the industry perspective, when you're looking at opportunities and there's potentially a way to do something at a low cost, if you can ensure that there's a high volume that comes out of it, but it's very difficult to take the leap of faith to try that out in the market. And because of that, you end up developing something, putting a lot of money into that development, and you have to sell it for a high cost. And then you get stuck in that position where your customers can't afford it, but you also can't afford to sell it for any less. So we're just stuck with a high cost product. And it takes a lot of risk from the company's perspective to attempt to make a low-cost product and get it into the market. And having the information available to better judge what the market is looking for would really help there.
Fantastic. Thanks, Rusty, for closing that out. And thanks, everybody, for your fantastic comments and your feedback. I know there's more to say than we have time to get to, so please do keep putting things in the chat for ourselves and in the Q&A for everyone to read. Let's take a break for about 3 minutes and let's reconvene at 5 till the hour. And we're going to jump into a session on acquisition opportunities. So thanks, folks. See you in a few minutes. All right, folks, if you're around, please turn on your cameras and let's jump back in.
Chris, would you mind if I made a comment?
Sure, go ahead, Pierre.
Something that I'm chewing, a point I'm chewing on now is the following one. I think we can't say that every measurement made in the ocean is part of ocean observing. It would only be part of ocean observing is that if that data was shared and if something was known about the quality and if it was available later on. So simply the fact that manufacturers like us or others manufacture more sensors and provide it to other blue economies or economies on the ocean is not an increase in ocean observing. If we look at this figure that Zdenka showed in the beginning with the ocean observing value chain, there is the societal benefit included in it. And this is the ocean observing and the understanding that we have of ocean observing, right? I think this is a very important aspect in what we have just discussed, whether people, I mean, it's like if you have a weather station at home and you just measure temperature for yourself, this is not adding to the WMO initiatives or contributing to global weather models, right? This is just for your private interest. And I think this is also something we have to keep in mind here. Yes, we can do more business in the blue economies. Yes, we can sell more sensors to the established parts, but it's very interesting to investigate in how far this ocean observing for the sake of society can be enhanced through collecting data from industry or specifically carving out more value in it.
Thanks, Pierre. Graham, do you want to layer in on that? And then I will start session 2.
Very quickly, I fully agree with that. There are thousands, millions of ocean measurements that have been made in the oil and gas industry, the renewables industry, which are owned or sitting in data stores of various different companies, which have never got into that wider societal benefit through sharing in ocean observations. And there ought to be real opportunity from the platforms that are operating and the work that is being done in the oceans to share more data.
Thanks, Graham. Okay, our second session is focused on facilitating acquisition opportunity. So varying forms of regulations apply to public and private sector purchasing around the world. Intellectual property and copyright law, a fractured landscape of buyers, and public sector purchasing constraints affect the sale and use of products and services at all points in the value chain. Ocean observing system procurement is largely national or regional in scope, providing a complicated and, as some folks have said, inefficient landscape for vendors to navigate. What coordination is needed to establish the economies of scale that allow for purchasing in the market? Rob, go ahead.
Thanks. So when you think about how a private business can reduce the cost and therefore the price to the customer, obviously volume is an obvious one. You know, there's going to be certain volume thresholds that are meaningful to our suppliers that we get savings. So buying 5 versus 1 of something may not make a material difference, but 100, 500 certainly can. So that's one, but there's many other aspects to facilitating or creating a more efficient transaction. One is just the number of customers we're having to work with. So if organizations can consolidate and make that whole transaction more efficient by having a smaller number of point people, a smaller number of locations to ship to, similar standard terms, whether it's warranty or ongoing support and service, all of those things can generate savings for the business that we can pass on to the customer. So I think, and again, as others have said, this is all going to come back to standards, right? So if there's some established standards, then I think that's going to facilitate that type of opportunity.
Melinda, go ahead, and then Mark.
Adding on to what just Rob just said, yes, definitely having more guaranteed revenue. So it doesn't necessarily need to be high volume. Again, recognizing that we're specialized, but to have an ongoing predictable volume. We do IDIQs where we know we're going to provide, say, 20 tags a year for 5 years. That will make it feasible for us to pursue something that is highly specialized. So I think, again, that it is some sort of way to guarantee a revenue, be it one large purchase, which actually for us, smaller companies is more difficult to achieve, but rather ongoing purchases that will help justify the investment. And then absolutely the comment about single point purchases and single point tech support. We have a very large tech support team, and if we can have minimize the number of support people that we need to interact with and have them train the rest of their staff, that really does reduce our costs.
Thank you, Mark, and then Clara.
Hi, everybody. So I'm Mark Schroep. I work at Schmidt Marine Technology Partners, which is part of the Schmidt Family Foundation. So I'm sort of an outside observer to all this. I don't sell anything to anybody, and I'm more observing how other people are trying to develop or first identify markets and develop. So in that sense, some of what I say might be naive or obvious, but as we're talking, it just seems like there's so much more room for coordination between some of these efforts. And that may be the naive part, because I'm not recognizing how hard it might be to coordinate, say, interests between two countries, governments, purchases of ocean observing equipment when it's, nearly impossible just to get coordination within one agency or one government. But it seems like a lot of this comes back to needing, obviously, to build these markets and having awareness on the side of the government and the people that could ultimately purchase about the business needs. I mean, I think that's part of what this conversation is about. And I don't know how you solve that, but it certainly seems like there could be more consolidation of the government needs for particular technologies. I'm speaking pretty vaguely. And also just awareness of this need to go and find or kind of help people identify some of these smaller markets that can tie in. And I know there's complications to all the things I'm saying, but I guess that the end thing is it seems like there's lots of room for collaboration and consolidation between the different groups that could make it a lot easier for a company to develop these products.
Absolutely, Mark. And so we'll go to Clara, Katie, and Matt. And I want to layer in a question sort of to refine what Mark just said too, of, do folks think it's realistic and possible on the observing system side of the equation to come together and engage in purchasing across institutions and across programs that allows these efficiencies of scale? So we can think about that one too as folks start to answer. Clara, go ahead.
So as somebody who's on the other side, your question about whether institutions could come together to purchase, it's probably impossible, because every institution has unique, difficult, mind-bending regulations. It's hard to imagine them coming together. But what you could come together on is, if you all agreed on a sensor package, for example, let's go back to the BGC Apex. If you all agreed on a sensor package, what if you purchased that package from the vendor and then you delivered it to our factory, so that we're not absorbing the risk and the overhead of delivering those sensors. We know what's coming every time. You've got a base package. That would be a way for you to move the bar forward. And maybe you contribute to a fund that purchases all those sensors. Maybe you have a group funding for that, and you get that through your institutions. The other thing is, I'm sorry, I have a lot to say about this. Risk. Risk is huge for us. You think about our costs, and they're significant, but the risk is a really big cost for us. So if you want us to warranty that you're going to put your glider in the water and it's going to never get hit by a ship, that's going to cost you a lot of money. If you want us to warranty that your Apex is never going to run into any issues in that challenging ocean, it's a big risk for us because most of the cost of our platforms is in the sensor. It's not our cost. So, and we just pay the same money that you do for them. So if you could make agreements on how you balance risk, maybe you have an insurance fund for all of you that you pay into or something. Those are some ways that you could really get costs down and globally contribute. Something to think about.
Great points. Thank you. Katie, go ahead.
Well, just in reaction to Clara, you know, this comes back to this idea of some plug and play units, doesn't it, to work across platforms, and maybe that's something to think about more. So, sorry, my name's Katie Hill. I'm the UK G7 Marine Science Coordinator. I co-lead a G7 action called the Future of the Seas and Oceans initiative to try and get G7 governments to work together to strengthen our sustained observing systems. So I guess I'm kind of providing a bit of government international view into this. So I did want to talk a little bit about scale, and it's interesting to hear that these kind of agreements on the size of the market would be useful. We have been trying to work with the G7 to get agreements on priorities for coordinated investment, and then get them to work together to invest in that and perhaps address some of these more issues around sensor availability. So the G7 agreed that biogeochemical algo was a priority for coordinated investment, but of course that then has knock-on effects now that the US has got at-scale investment in that. It means that other countries trying to buy smaller components of that network are challenged. The other one, which I think I'll pick up, that was talked about previously, was timescales. So for the sustained observing system, even for the sustained observing system, we largely don't have sustained funding. So there is a small number of countries that are funded in a form of research infrastructure. Now look at David. I don't know whether he would consider NOAA GOMO as a research infrastructure program, but to my mind, it is. In Australia, IMOS is a research infrastructure program. I used to work for it as well with before Paul. And France funds research infrastructure. Those are the only three that I know of, which is, you know, the fit for purpose, long time scale funding, in addition to some operational programs, which means that most of our observing system at the global level is funded as a kind of positive side effect of patched together research programs, big components of the global scale observations. And that makes a real challenge both at the programmatic level, at the government level, or the people that are running those programs, in providing that kind of strategic planning, having a kind of innovation program running alongside it to evolve and innovate, to build the partnerships required to deliver that observing system, and other things. So there are some people like me, so I'm not talking on behalf of government. I work in liaison with government, who said it's not necessarily thinking about saying we need more money, we need more money, we need more money to put gear in the water. We need to think about how we structure the funding streams so that governments get maximum benefit for what they are already investing in observing systems. For biogeochemical algo in the UK, you know, it's very much ad hoc. When we can afford it, we get some money for capital bids, and then try and find some money down the back of the sofa to even fund the data transmission sometimes, depending on what pot of money becomes available. So, you know, we need to find a way of having that conversation, that ocean observations, the sustained observing system, needs a form of infrastructure funding. It needs to be funded in a way that reflects how it's used, and how it's needed.
Thanks, Katie. Matt, David, and Paul, and then I'm going to go with a question in a different direction.
Hi, everyone. Matt Womble, Director of Ocean Data Programs at Saildrone. A couple of points on this one that has been talked about quite a bit is coordination. We do a lot of missions with NOAA, and while coordination across the different NOAA entities and NOAA line offices has been increasing in recent missions, there's still a lot of growth that can occur and a lot of additional benefits that can be derived from a single platform out with a diverse set of sensors, in which the primary use, for example, could be a fisheries survey, but the data, all of the MEDOC data is still being collected off of a Saildrone platform, but it's not being utilized. That is a prime opportunity for groups in NOAA to work with fisheries to figure out how to best utilize that data. Now, you don't necessarily get as much direction over where the vehicle goes, but you're getting MEDOC data from an area where you previously are probably not getting it, and at a scale you're not getting it. So that's an example of where collaboration just internally within NOAA could be a lot better, and there could be improved monetary benefit, and it's really no additional charge for that. So I kind of bucket that in the category of coordination around multi-layered missions, utilizing things that the agency itself is already paying for in the NOAA example. Another thing is there's been a lot of talk about predictability of volume, but I think predictability of duration is important, particularly for autonomous uncrewed systems. It's a lot when we talk about doing a mission for 20 days versus doing a mission for 180 days, it's a lot better for us to do a mission that's longer duration than a shorter duration mission. The people costs associated with doing a business model like what Saildrone does, which is mission as a service or data as a service, there's a lot more people costs associated with short duration missions than there is with long duration missions. So predictability around length of mission and trying to structure things to do longer duration, longer time series. And then my final point is around business models. Is the traditional business model around ocean observing has been procurement of systems and then the launching of those systems. There's a paradigm shift, I think, happening within the community around recognizing that data as a service and mission as a service is a model where it's a company owned, company operated in partnership with a customer, and the commodity that the customer receives is the data off of the vehicle. You avoid acquisition costs, you avoid operations costs, you avoid maintenance costs. All of that is built into what ultimately amounts to a daily rate for the product, and you're receiving what you really want in the end, which is data. And I think that can drive a lot of value to the agencies, both from a staffing perspective of just you can actually have more people focused on the data and the operations costs that you wouldn't have to absorb.
Thanks, Matt. I want to come back to that last point a little bit later, but David and Paul, please jump in.
I just wanted to, I think Katie is definitely on the money there. I mean, it's no pun intended, but IMOS, for example, is a perfect example and of sustained effort. And I think, at least in my experience with them has been great to work with them. But I think one thing that they do well, at least in my experience, has been is that so far we've been talking about technology, and we use the term technology to encompass a lot of different things. And we just say technology when it is a system that measures temperature versus a system that measures waves versus a system that measures, currents. There are, in terms of technology, they are universes apart. And we'll oftentimes just group them together to say, well, that's technology. And to make, a thermistor that is very accurate, or it is, can run in very low power, then to make a wave radar that can, operate for months on end, it's a completely separate planet in terms of thinking, in terms of resources, in terms of R&D, in terms of everything else. And so one thing that I think, tying in the sort of sustainable funding, I think that in my experience, like I said, IMOS has done pretty well, is that they associate the purchasing and the acquisition and the process of using and deploying these technology based on, or at least they leverage and they weigh in based on what the actual sensor and what the actual parameter is. So if it's something that it is simple, and it's something that it is easy to use, and it's something that it doesn't, is generally lower cost, then they adjust the effort based on that. And so as you move up the complexity scale, there will be more specialized people that are responsible for that, instead of just throwing everything in a bucket and saying, oh, we need to buy more technology, or we need to acquire, or we need to use more technology, when it is it's a completely different beast to deploy and to operate, a temperature chain or a temperature sensor than it is to operate, like I said, a current profiler or a drone, for example, or a USV. So I think that needs to certainly be part of the discussion, and it should help us to understand what the what it is that we're ultimately trying to achieve here. Because if we just group everything and we just say technology, it's going to be very difficult, because we're all going to be coming from very, very widely different perspectives.
Yeah, great point, David. Paul, what a nice lead in for IMOS. Go ahead. Oh, you're muted, Paul.
There we go. Building on those last two, thank you, David, and building on what Katie said as well, who leaves a great legacy at IMOS. So yes, we are funded relatively long term now. We're coming up to our next funding round, where we're expecting another 5 years. Prior to that, we've had many years where we've gone just basically year to year. Times when we've gone down, times when we've increased. But we're about sustained long-term observations, and it's taxpayer funding that we're getting, though we operate with a co-funding model, a co-invest model, where if you want to get funding from us to do any observations, you need to bring some co-invest to the table, which allows us to essentially triple the value of what we're able to do around the country, and we're national in what we do. So our national groups can come together and figure out the standard types of technology that or sensors that they want to use, standardize those around the country, which makes it easier for data sets to be meshed together from different areas, making it easy for the data to be accessed and used, which is what it's all about for us. We live and die on that data use and uptake. And I guess that also leads into some of the other points that have been made earlier around standardization and best practices. Those are imperative to what we do, because that builds trust with our end user community, to make sure that they're going to use the data as well. They know that what they're getting from us is the best it can be, because it's based on best practices, and we insist our operators document all those best practices for us. And there was a question previously, I think, about where they might be found. Ocean's best practices system is a repository where we deposit all of our protocols, and that's everything for us from calibration, because your data is only going to be as good as your calibration, right through to QA/QC of the data through the protocols and all that sort of stuff. And it's 1:20 here, so I'm getting lost a bit, and I may have forgotten the part of my points, but it's important for us to make sure that we're investing wisely these taxpayer dollars, to make sure that we squeeze every last bit of value that we can out of every dollar that we invest. And what that means is we can't afford, we've got a lot of stuff that we're trying to do around Australia. We operate 63 now different facilities, everything from Argo through, we've got spotter wave buoys, we've got regular type wave buoys, moorings, different types of moorings, shallow water, deep water, we run gliders. We've got lots of different sensors on ships of opportunity. We tag animals, all sorts of different things. But all the information that we collect is integrated, and is all sort of pulling in the same direction, I guess, and adding value to each other. We don't tend to go off on a tangent. So through all of that, I guess what I'm trying to get to is there's limited opportunities for us to do new things. and we can't really afford to explore concept technology. And we tend to make all our investments in mature technology. Having said that, we do need to have a capacity to be able to explore ways to grow what we're doing in response to emerging pressures and threats and emerging issues that might be affecting our stakeholders. And to do that, we have a facility that we call our New Tech Proving Facility, where we put a call out for any sort of pilot scale technology that might be out there that our operators think can bring improvements or efficiencies to what we do or make what we do more effective. And those proposals are assessed by our science and technology, or with advice from our science and technology advisory committee. They're then funded for a couple of years to see how they work, see how successful they are. And after that, our Science and Technology Advisory Committee again provides advice on whether these are the sorts of things that we need to think about pulling into our program. But that's really sort of the only opportunity that we've got to explore these sorts of different things. The last thing I guess I'll say is the plug and play is really important. If we were able to take a sensor out of a glider, plug it into a CTD, or you know, have that suddenly on a mooring collecting the same information, that'd be a really big advantage. And I think something that it would be great globally to start thinking about.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Thanks, Paul. Natalie, do you want to quickly wrap up this question? And then I've got one more I think we can get to in the remainder of the session.
Yeah, sure. So I had just a couple points really quickly. I think there's a critical need for large international programs such as Argo, especially to have several sensor manufacturers and platform manufacturers in the market. And that's very important to identify issues with the data that may be with the stability or accuracy, and also for identifying and understanding early cases of failure. So if you have just one type of platform or one type of sensor, you won't be able to answer that question. Also for the industry, based on the discussions from earlier, I think it's very important that that requires resources, that the manufacturers have some sort of flexibility for the need from the producers to ask for new requirements for the sensors. Those sensors, especially when they're new, they will evolve with time. And so it requires from the providers to understand that. Also something that is needed from the industry, and I think we'll come back to that point later, is that there's a need for funding from the industry for technology development. Often cases, this comes from the public sector, from the academic institutions, and there's a strong need for doing that. And then just my last point, that was just to continue on the comments from earlier, is that there is a need for the industry and the different observing networks to work together, so that when there's a technology development for, say, one case of sensor, and I'm referring, Rob, you may have understood that, to the pressure sensor that was discovered for Deep Argo, and that made important, I think, improvement for, say, ocean moorings. So I'm not sure what is the best platform for it. I think it should come from the industry, but I think the academic institutions would be very happy to help the industry coordinate between different observing networks to sort of not reinvent the wheel, as if there's an important finding that is relevant for other platforms, then it needs to be shared.
Excellent. Thanks, Natalie. And we will get into some of the R&D and technology development pieces in the next session. So I'm glad you brought that up now. I want to go a slightly different direction, and I imagine this question is going to take the remainder of the time we have in the session, and it builds a bit on something Matt said. So as the community contemplates growth in observing system infrastructure, how do we balance the reality that technology can be procured from a commercial vendor, can be built or developed by a national lab or academic research facility, and ownership can be bypassed completely using emission data as a service procurement. How do we delineate the boundaries in this space or lay out guiding principles of engagement so that everyone can succeed in this space? Peer.
Yeah, thank you very much. That's a very, very interesting question. I think we all have examples to tell about this, right? Where we encounter, for example, also national funding going into the development of a competing technology, or although a commercially available unit already exists. I think that also falls in that part. I think we found that there is a lot of work academia can bring to the table in order to improve the environment. Formation of standards, formulation of best practices, consolidation, etc., etc., etc. And also anything that is related to research, that's intrinsically what is expected of that field. So anytime something is done that is also commercially available, I would like to see why it is not purchased or procured as from the commercial entity. Why? What is the reason for doing it through the institute? So whenever a commercial opportunity is there, it should be specifically looked at. Why isn't the commercial unit or the commercial service procured? As long as the quality is met, right? I mean, that is that must be met, of course. Why is that job repeated? Because I think there is enough work to do on the academia side, and this is so important to drive and develop that field, that this is the point. And I see this stimulates some answers.
Thanks, Peer. Toast and then Rob.
Now, I think it's a great opportunity for private entities to go in and work along the whole value chain of ocean observing, not just producing the technology, but even making observations and producing data and in the end only information. But it seems to me that you need a stamp of approval in a way on the quality of data, and we need to build that facility to be able to do that. And if we have that, and the companies are willing to go into that certification process, or whatever you like to call it, I think we can open up a huge market. And in the end, we will be happy. We have business opportunities, and in the end, scientists will have more data to work with. And we are not really in the business of being scientists to go out and make observations. We want to take the observations and then make the science out of that. And I think we have to come away from that mindset in the science, that we are doing the whole value chain. We're building the instrument in the lab, we go out on the ship, take the measurements, and then we're home and write the paper. So we can actually work much more efficient together, but I think it needs that certification authority in some way or another to facilitate that. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Rob, David, Matt, and then we will go into a short break.
Thanks. I think one of the best opportunities there is to accelerate development is field validation of these technologies. So as we all know, there's no standards in our industry, and I'm talking about sensors, on how you specify performance. And you can't compare apples to apples looking at just the specs of different sensors. Different companies have different approaches to how they generate those specs. And typically you can't get a good feel for how it's going to perform long-term in the real world, in the real ocean. And so the community, the ocean science community, working with industry to provide, first of all, standards on what is a good test. And for those of you that are familiar with the Alliance of Coastal Technologies, they did a lot of great work to try and serve that role of doing objective and effective comparisons or tests of instruments in the real world. So having some standard there, but then making opportunities to get instruments into the field to the industry would be fantastic, whether it's being able to deploy a prototype float on a cruise, or taking advantage of a cruise to do casts and profiling. Those are the opportunities we need. And if we had some consistency on how the instruments were being tested to assure that they will actually, we understand how they will work long-term in the ocean, it would be a huge improvement.
Thanks, Rob. David, Matt, and then Lee, do you want to finish this up?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I think it's a really great question. And in my mind, a couple of things come to mind. First of all, I think where there are really unexplored spaces or needs or requirements, I think, where we see new technologies, new companies coming to the table and saying, I've got a solution for this. That is, I think, resonating with agencies like ours, and we're trying to take advantage of that. Where I see the tension is, where we have a number of requirements that, perhaps not can completely be met by commercial opportunity and commercially available technologies, or it might not even be cost effective. So there it becomes a sort of question about, well, what are our choices? How do we navigate? I don't think we figured out how to do that. I would love to be able to find some more commercial solutions, but it's just a question of how many. I'm not sure they can meet all of our requirements, and then it's a question of, well, how do we choose this platform or that platform? And we haven't quite figured out how quite to make that evaluation and assessment of trade-offs. So a couple of thoughts. Anyway, thanks, Chris.
Thank you. Matt, go ahead.
And building on what a couple of folks said, it could be standards, or more simply put, sort of what government and customers want to see from a platform. For example, if government was to say any uncrewed system platform that's going to do missions for us needs to provide us an XYZ data set that's a comparison between this existing platform, and that's your test case. You need to demonstrate your sensor and data reliability against something else. What is the thing to compare against? I think you would see industry go do that on their own to be able to prove that their platform can play and can provide what you're looking for. But currently, that's not really a known thing. What is it that you want? What is it that government wants industry to compare against, or to have something to compare against? Taking off my I guess Saildrone hat a little bit and putting on a former hat of mine when I was doing appropriations for NOAA on the Senate. I think it's budgetary. I think the agencies have to look at what is your budgets, what are the budgets realistically going to grow at. We talked a lot today about expanding ocean observation opportunities. The reality is likely that we're not going to see monumental increases in funding, and so it's how do you make best utilization of the resources that you have, and that's it's a question between, I think, business models and things like whether you're procuring a lot of systems or you're buying data. There's value there across both approaches, but I think the agencies have to look at what's the most cost-effective model. And then the notion of building things, whether it's between national labs and academia or commercial building things, that's I think from a sensor perspective, where there's not necessarily sensor availability, it makes sense and to partner with that. But if you want something on scale and volume of whether it's a platform or a sensor, I think commercial is really the most viable option and the most cost-effective option. So I think you ultimately always have to go down that road. It's going to be something at volume or scale.
Thanks, Matt. And Lee, go ahead.
Thank you, and good afternoon from the UK. Very quickly, so up until a few months ago, I led the National Marine Facilities Division at the UK's National Oceanography Centre, and I've subsequently moved into the UK's Research Council area, and I'm leading a programme where we're looking at how we use innovative technology to move the UK's marine research infrastructure to low or zero carbon by 2040. So right on the sort of edge of technology coming in that area. I'm going to take the answer to your question, which was a great question to finish on, and pick up a point that I think Clara made earlier, which is about how do we share the risk between all the people involved in this. My sense is that we have to develop and formalize longer term relationships and agree where that risk can sit and where we can support each other. And the other program that I'm leading in this role is upgrading and improving the UK's Antarctic infrastructure. And that's a sort of a 15-year program. It covers ships, aircraft, buildings, and autonomy. And we've accepted early on in that program that these are long-term relationships with key strategic partners, and we will share risk. And that's financial, that's delivery over time, that's innovating the technology and agreeing there. So I just close on that point. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm glad you brought that up. And I'd like to start session 3 with a discussion of risk, particularly on the innovation and development of new technologies. But for the moment, let's take a short break. Let's reconvene at 40 after the hour, and we will jump into session 3. We're pretty close to schedule, so I may shorten our last break for the day, just in the interest of further discussion. So I'll see you in about 4 minutes. Thank you. All right, welcome back, everybody. We'll give folks a few seconds to trickle in, and then we'll kick off session 3. So thank you, everybody, for your great input so far. I'm watching the conversation on the Q&A, I'm watching the conversation on the panelist chat, and obviously our discussion is enthralling. So thank you, everybody. I know there's more to talk about than we have time to get into at depth. So do encourage all of our panelists to continue to put thoughts into the paper that comes out at the end of this dialogue to further refine what the recommendations are for the community. So our third and final session is focused on innovation investments and structures needed to meet the challenges of market growth. So several observing projects include collaboration between government, academic, and industry partners for the development of technologies, the demonstration of concepts, and the execution of pilot projects. The landscape is varied, however, on which sectors are responsible for funding R&D, for training the next generation of technical workers, and developing the next generation of technologies that will be commercialized. Understanding the present-day constraints in this space can help us to unlock future modes of operating across all of our sectors. So my first question, for a company choosing to pursue internal technology development versus in-licensing a known asset from another venture is in part tied to an assessment of risk tolerance, that a technology will be both functional and from a patent standpoint protectable. Is there opportunity for partnership between government, research organizations, and industry that evenly distributes the risk and reward in the development of new technologies? And if there is, are there exemplar models that work from other sectors we should look to emulate? Excellent. David, Pierre, and Graham, please go ahead.
Yeah, I think the short answer is yes, all of the above. I think making it happen depends heavily on what was mentioned early in terms of sustainability for certain long term. Because it's one thing to take the risk for a short term, a 6-month project or even a year project, but to make something that is going to work for a long time, this is multi-year. And so handling that risk is definitely needs to factor that perspective. So I got a lot more to say about that, but I think I'll probably lots of hands up at the moment. So I'll let others chime in as well.
Thanks, David. And please jump back in and add refinement as you see fit. Pierre, go ahead.
Thank you. I also want to make one very important comment in this respect, and this is not to wait too long before the collaboration starts. If an institute develops a technology, tries to decide by themselves what to protect and how to protect and where to apply for IP protection, and then go on for 4 years, 8 years, whatever else, and then trying to seek an entity to commercialize it, it might be too late. And they might have even unrealistic expectations with respect to what they want as a return. So I can just invite and motivate everybody to seek for exchange and collaboration very early on, because if there is commercial potential and if a company or an industrial player is to pick it up, then this can be best identified and they can bring in their best advice if this happens quite early. That is very important. And also our industry or our environment here is to a very large extent on the industrial side represented by small and medium enterprises. And I think our view is also biased by experiences with these type of entities. We do not have a lot of large company involvement in the field. And I also sense that if we had a more mature environment with all the advantages that we have discussed and that are written in other documents, we must not underestimate what the difference will be or would be if there was more real industrial and large company involvement.
Excellent, thank you. Graham.
I agree with most of what was said last, but I'd also say that smaller and medium-sized companies are possibly more agile than larger industrial players, and can offer quite significant benefits. However, for such smaller, medium-sized companies, the IP space out there is vast, complicated, and extremely costly to look around things like such as freedom to operate studies, and understanding the commercial viability of a new technology and protecting and developing that technology worldwide. I'd also offer the idea that the transition of technologies from research institutions in the broadest sense, and from other companies, is quite difficult, and is very much related to people and know-how, as well as recipes and plans and drawings, and the engagement and the long-term connection with people, or possibly even the transfer of those people out of research institutions to ensure the success of those technology transfers and commercializations is probably critical. Thanks.
Thank you. Andy, and then Clara.
I think, yeah, this is a good question. Coming from a company and a background that where you're VC backed, there's a lot of opportunities that are missed. Although being a small company, some things cannot be customer funded or funded by agencies. We're not technically a small business, so many of our innovations are internal. And we have a particular challenge being that we operate on the surface and subsurface. So a lot of our innovations are marinizing technologies that are used for one domain or the other. And when we do develop things under external funding, a lot of the programs are drawn out over multi-year, where we could apply the resources, to develop something much faster and get it to market. We need that validation support also externally from the agencies oftentimes. And I think it's already mentioned too, the transition of these technologies. So once we invest, once we develop this new capability, this new sensor, will it be utilized? So I think that falls into that risk as well, of spending those resources and time on developing those new sensing capabilities.
Thanks, Andy. I'd like to go with Clara, and then I'd like to bring Beth in, and then we'll continue on with this question. Thanks.
I love this question because what we're not is agile. But what we are is really good at infrastructure. We have a large infrastructure. We're not going to go anywhere. We're stable. In order to do that, we have a certain set of costs. We're able to buy inventory lower cost. We have production we can scale. Those are all the things that innovator wants to align with. But what I often find is there is a bias against working with a corporation. And that's something that we need to move beyond. And what Pierre said is exactly right. The sooner that we can start to work together, the sooner that we can align so that your innovation is successful. A great example of that is, I don't know how many times we've over-designed because we think you want the best. You don't want the best, you want the cheapest, or you want some other piece that's better. But because we weren't in there understanding soon enough, we've done this incorrectly, and then we have a certain price. So the earlier, the more trust. And then the last piece of it is we have to have some security. So if we're going to put a lot of money into developing your instrument and then it's immediately going to be commoditized, we simply can't support that and be here for the long term, which is what you also want from us. So all those pieces have to be thought about.
Those are great points. Thank you. Beth, can I ask you to jump in?
Hi, my name is Beth Curry. I'm with MRV Systems, the Director of Science Programs. And I just wanted to echo on what Graham was saying about the transition from the tech from academia to industry. Oftentimes in my experience with what we've been doing with Scripps through NOPS, like Natalie mentioned in the chat, is that it's kind of different processes and different languages. So even though, academia might develop a technology and then it's like, oh, here, okay, now you know, commercialize and sell this. It actually takes bringing it in and often putting it in a different sort of format and system that goes along with, you know, mass production and modeling. And it does take more time than just like, oh, here it is, you know, go run with it. That sort of thing does take time. And yeah, I just wanted to kind of echo that as well. It's a good point from Graham and Natalie.
Thanks, Beth. Yi and Rob.
Yeah, just to add many points as previous speakers already, to fill the gap between the innovation from academic and to a commercial production in a massive scale is all about sharing the risk. So who to share the risk? You'll hear some of the customers, we only buy mature demonstrated product, and then sometimes government have resources like SBIR to share some of the risk to push the innovation a little bit further to the commercial product. But there's still a gap after those fundings and resources. So there's a need for both sides to share that risk, not only through financial support, but also intent to adapt the new technology, provide support to cross that valley of death. And I think the point I want to make is about sharing the risk on both sides and then partnership to make it happen, the transition.
Rob, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to quickly bring up a really successful example of how to address risk and accelerate innovation, which is the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute. They're a unique entity in that they're primarily funded from private funding, Packard Foundation, with a mission to innovate technologies for studying the ocean. And so their mission is is focused on innovation and technologies and working with the private sector to then scale that. And you know, there's lots of good examples of academic institutes that are doing really important development, but you know, working with different universities or institutes can be really challenging. They have very different terms and as far as IP and technology, but this model of a foundation with a mission to innovate and having the resources and the capital equipment to really to do it effectively has been super successful with MBARI. And then, you know, for billionaires out there looking at ways to spend their money, I mean, I think that model is a success and should really be considered in other parts of the world because it streamlines the commercialization process extremely well.
It certainly does, although I think the pool of potential partners who can invest in that way is certainly limited. So maybe a question just to further refine for the group, and you know, especially as industry folks want to weigh in on this one, you know, when you look at all the opportunities for who can invest in R&D, whether it's you know, a benefactor like the, you know, MBARI works with, if it's government in the US through SBIR, if it's internal R&D funding, you know, there's a lot of modes we can look at as a community to fund innovation. What are the constraints we see in access to capital? And what do we think the future footing needs to be to make capital available for ideas to be invested in? Mark, go ahead.
Well, one thought I wanted to share real quickly, and unfortunately I have to leave in just a few minutes, but as I don't think I even said it when I introduced myself. For those that don't know, Schmidt Marine funds development of ocean technologies. So that's what we're aimed at. And I know there are a growing number of the billionaires and the wealthy and folks and their entities that are interested in funding things, either directly what we're talking about here, or at least related, some of these other markets. And one of the things that is a challenge that can be addressed with groups like this is some of the same work that people are talking about to identify markets and to say what their needs are, and all of these things also help drive some of the philanthropic investment, because if we can identify a group that says, this is a technology that's needed for this application, or any of these kinds of things that have kind of played out in some of these other conversations, those can be really powerful tools for us when we go to our board and when other groups go to boards to say, this is where we need to be focusing, and this is where we need to be investing. So that's one way to do that. And as I say, the most, I think, encouraging thing is there are a growing number of groups that are interested in this, but they need some help in defining the best paths. I'll put it that way.
David.
I guess most of the question probably for Mark, probably the one of the audience most likely who can answer this, but for those of you who are involved in what Robert mentioned in terms of sort of a philanthropic or large institution funded projects, it seems to me, and please correct me if my understanding is off, that when that does happen, you often, what you end up with is with an exquisite sensor that only works for that particular place or application, and you don't end up with something that can be easily or readily commercialized. And I mean, is that true? And how do we go about, if whoever has a friend who's a billionaire and they want to put money into this, how do I end up with not something that is just, as we say in the industry, the Homer Simpson car?
Yeah, there's a whole lot of pieces to this. Lots of different groups that take very different approaches. I think that has been true at times and certainly can be true. I can only really speak for Schmidt Marine to say that our goal is to avoid that at all costs. So we don't fund something that is only going to be used by one person or one lab group or whatever. We see the value in that. We're strong proponents of ocean research in pretty much every form, but that's not what we do. So we are looking at technologies that do have these, at least potentially have these larger markets. And in fact, I won't go into it, but we came about in part through a recognition that the smaller scale things were not what we needed to be doing. That was, I don't know if that answered the question, but we don't do that and we try to avoid it.
Thanks.
Excellent. Rob.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out the importance of innovators, wherever they are in the public or private sector, getting started with a commercial partner that can scale as early as possible. So when there's an innovation out of an institute that is working as a standalone sensor, that is a huge step, but there is a massive journey to get to figure out how to actually build that at scale and be able to support it long term. And that's really where, taking practical approaches to technologies for the ocean, because it's a tough world out there, and involving a manufacturing partner as early as possible can't be overestimated. And we've got to plan for that. We've got to say, all right, having a fuel prototype that has been validated on a one-off or small numbers gets us maybe 20% of the journey, right? And then there's this huge effort to figure out, all right, how do we train non-PhDs to build this? How do we, get the materials? How do we get it at a reasonable cost? Is a massive effort.
Thanks, Rob. Natalie, do you want to finish this one up? And then I've got another question to go with.
Yes, so I have 2 points. I guess the first one is that talking about Argo again, the Argo has defined different stages that I think are, very useful to the industry, and just to inform the industry that the implementation of the sensor and the global implementation of the sensor, and then including this new sensor data into the Argo data stream is something that takes time. There's different stages that the manufacturers has to go through, that goes from pilots to multiple pilots and to global implementation. So that's something that is useful, I think. And then also, I think there's a need for having more oceanographers part of the industry in terms of developing, and that's something, a trend that I think is of concern, at least to me and to others, that there's not enough oceanographers that have the knowledge of ocean dynamics or ocean hydrography that are part of the industry that can make the link between the engineers and the public institution. And this is critical for technology development.
Thanks, Natalie. All right, I want to go with a completely different direction as we think about the needs and challenges for future innovation. So exponential growth in observing system assets is going to require a corresponding growth in the human capital that's required to create, to operate, and to maintain the technologies we need in the future. How do we hire and train the necessary talent we need to enable that technology to operate and survive in extreme environments? But also, how do we compete against established industry players in other sectors, particularly those that need software, mechanical, and electrical engineers of similar talent? David.
Yes, thanks. Thanks for bringing. I think that is a critical point in all this discussion, because in everything that we talked about, at the end of the day, it's people doing this, right? And it's the people who are actually making things happen. And although we like to think, or at least consider that, we're talking about, particular sensors or very capable sensors. At the end of the day, what you do need is very good, sharp, clever electrical and electronic engineers who know how to handle very low power, very low noise electronics, often, and mechanical engineers who can build packages to make things survive the ocean. And there is very few, to my knowledge, training centers for this sort of expertise, where you not only combine the electrical and electronic capability, but you will combine some type of field work, experience, or some type of outdoors, or somebody, it's a completely different thing. You take somebody who's a very good software engineer, but who has never developed a product that is going to be used in an oceanographic or even in an outdoor setting. It's just their mind, the way that they think and the way that they go about things is very different. And so finding these people is extraordinarily difficult. And when you do find them, it's very difficult to hold on to them as well. And so it is definitely a challenge. I don't think my solution, at least how I have gone about it, is through a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, basically, just putting in a lot of effort in working very closely with people and knowing and talking to a lot of people to find these people, because they are not there on LinkedIn. They are not there in the world. They're not there on Indeed and in these normal hiring platforms. They are buried way deep into the bowels of institutions and some organizations that they have been there for a long time. And so finding them is a challenge. I think one thing that doesn't necessarily solve our immediate problem as a community, but will serve for the future, is to work on STEM type of programs at even a primary, but certainly secondary and tertiary education, because that will then start people need to think as an oceanographic based career rather than just an engineering career, or a software programming career, or a robotics career. They need to think of a career that is related to the ocean, related to the coastal environment, related to the marine world. And unless you are in a maritime country, you normally don't have that. You take somebody there are fantastic mechanical and software and electronic engineers here in the US who don't live by the coast, who are in the middle of the country. And if they were just told that, hey, there is an entire world out there that that you can pursue a very successful career by building things, but and today with post-pandemic world, even doing that remotely, so you don't need to leave the place that you grew up in, for example. But anyway, I think that's plenty for my side here, but that's something that's important to me.
Thanks, David. Clara, go ahead.
So this is a huge issue for us. So we can scale, we're really good at that, but what we can't do is find the people for all the reasons that David just said. And that's our biggest limiting factor. And it's not only that they need to be interested in ocean technology, they need to have that passion, because the reality is the moment you work in anything with ocean science or anything to do with ocean, you're going to be paid less. So you need to be passionate about what you're doing and really care about the science and climate and the end goal. And how do you get those people that are passionate? You start when they're very young. So we're really interested in partnering with you on any of those STEM programs, any of those outreach programs, so that when they see those, they also say, oh, there's also a potential job path for me. I could do this for a living. This could be how I live my life. I could work on something I really care about. And we'd like to be there from the beginning on that. The other thing is that we need training programs. There's training programs that are specific to ocean technology for all the reasons David just said. And we don't only need the PhDs. We need the technicians. We need all levels, and that's critical. So we need community colleges to have those programs too, and we're interested in partnering with them. We certainly have groups that we're working with where we're providing fellowships or that sort of thing so that we have a path for more advanced technologists to join our company eventually. We need those feeder programs, so we need all of it. We need people who care about ocean science to come work for us. We need your help for it.
Thanks, Clara. All right, let's go through the next five. Yi, Graham, Pierre, Carl, Rob.
Yeah, just building up the last two speakers talk about STEM education, workforce training, and especially talk about competition with other sectors. We need to build awareness on non-oceanographic colleges and the communities. So it seems like we do a really good job at training PhDs and ocean engineers in the major institutions doing oceanography. But how do we penetrate those colleges? Doesn't have a school of oceanography, doesn't have a department of oceanography. Go to those community colleges, bring those workforce. As I said, we are top heavy. We have a lot of PhDs and ocean engineers, but we need all kind of level of support to build the blue economy. So reaching out to the community, spread the message, and then away from the coast as well. That's the key. We are not doing very well as a community.
Thanks, Yi. Graham.
Yeah, I concur with the comments that have been made. We've been caring quite a lot about education over the last decade plus, far longer than that, really. And I think that the working from outreach and STEM, supporting local colleges, running apprenticeship programs, getting interns in, supporting PhDs, recruiting and training grads, that's all great. But to enable that, we've got to make this work have real value for those young people when they're coming into it. We've got to demonstrate clearly to them, we're actually doing stuff that's more complicated sometimes than SpaceX. It's more funky than autonomous cars. It has a real impact on humanity. And, it's like rocket science, it's just a bit more difficult. Perhaps sometimes I like to say to some of the kids that come in here that we're showing around and trying to encourage into things. And there are bloody great careers in it. You can travel the world, you can explore things, you can understand systems. And we have to start by promoting ourselves. We have to support those programs. We've got to encourage it and we've got to put the work in. But we really, really must paint we mustn't be out advertised by the SpaceXs and the Google cars and all the other funky things going on. We have to compete with them for embedded firmware engineers and electronic engineers, and it's tough. And I suspect it's tough for every manufacturer in every country, and it's tough for the research institutes to get the right personnel at the moment. We do hard stuff, but it's cool. And we've got to get that message that it's cool out there. And I think that's a really key piece. Start from that, then you get people fired up and excited about the difference we can make to this world. Thank you.
Thanks, Graham. Pierre, Carl, and Rob, and then we're going to close this question.
Okay, so it was said before, realistically, our sector does not pay the highest salaries, and this is not like consumer electronics, where you have endless career opportunities. I mean, we must be realistic in this respect. And that's why we are competing for the bright minds, which is also the case. And it can't be emphasized enough that while we might not be able to pay the highest salaries, we have that kind of ocean bonus, right? And I think Matt put it here in the chat as well by saying that we have this card to play about ethical engineering to attract the folks. And that is, I mean, that will always be the case, but we understood and we emphasized from the very beginning that we have that environmental awareness movement. And so that brings us the people. I think this is an important aspect. A completely different point in this respect is the training within the institutions where the PhDs, where the masters are trained. There should be a training on entrepreneurship. You should try to filter out the guys that have a sense for economy among the scientists and try to motivate them in either founding a company themselves or identifying who has that entrepreneurial skills and who has very good qualities in order to go into industry, and who is better continuing in science, because ultimately many will have to find a job in industry. So that was another aspect which was not covered by the whole STEM discussion we had before, getting some economic training also into the science tracks within the institutions.
Thanks, Pierre. Carl and Rob.
Yeah, so many good things have already been said. So I was jumping on this bandwagon with the idea that we've got to inspire. So Graham, you were talking about that. We've got to use all of the feedback you all just provided in fora like this, but create workforce development side events and tracks within the ocean science and tech conferences and things that we have, so that we design experiential education opportunities through blue tech innovators and hubs, et cetera, et cetera. And I think communicating all of the vertical functions we need. So some of the specialized ocean engineering functions, absolutely, but also the accounting and the program management and the policy management, and the social behavioral sciences on the service delivery side, the data and information services that we need to provide from our capabilities is a whole different field than some of us know about and think about, and the way we take information from users back into the system development. And so I'm within the context of New Blue Economy within NOAA being a high priority for Dr. Spinrad, one of the top 3 priorities. We're trying to build a workforce development element within that thread. And I had really recent conversations with Science Foundation on funding opportunities they had out there that didn't receive much feedback. So we're going to try to make connections to other networks and investments in this arena, get excitement going, and get more connections to this community's expertise, so that we can get your voices in the room when we're trying to inspire the next generation of students, so that they hear from the folks that need the people to fill the jobs. And one of the NSF pieces that was really interesting to me is they're doing a lot of work with 2-year colleges, and they've got data that shows them that companies are having more success hiring people out of 2-year programs and keeping them. So the keeping them on staff after the 2-year program is much more likely than after 4-year programs. The 4-year students come for a year and then leave. And so figuring out which models work for retention for the companies, and targeting those as a potential win-win is one example that I've heard of recently. So thanks for the chance to speak.
Thanks, Carl. Rob, do you want to wrap us up?
Sure. Yeah. So increasing the focus on expanding the pool of candidates through women in STEM, people of color, and people at different technical levels, like Carl just said, 2-year college is really, really important. But the ask from industry to the institutes and the academic in the universities is to continue to present opportunities in the private sector on par with opportunities in the academic sector. You know, I when I was in grad school, which was a long time ago, there was a stigma of, you know, working for a private company was sort of like going to the dark side or selling out or something like that. And I think we've come a long way since then, but we need to keep doing that. And I think one of the most effective ways is to involve the private sector in relevant courses, have us come in and present the exciting opportunities there are in the private sector, keep pushing for internships to get students involved, whether it's bachelor's, master's, or PhD level. But I think that's where we could really use some support, and I think it would make a difference.
Thanks, Rob. So thanks everybody for great input on that question. In the interest of time and to keep momentum going, I'm going to suggest that we skip our last break on the agenda and move into a final discussion session. Please duck out as needed over the remainder of our time together if you need to step away. At this point, though, I'd actually like to invite all audience participants in to join the conversation for the remaining 45 minutes. And as folks start to transition over from audience participation to sort of full-scale participation, I just want to ask everybody to please raise your hand if you have a question or a comment for the group. I'll call on you. We're going to have plus or minus 70 people for this last 45-minute session. So it's unlikely I'm going to be able to get to everyone. So I just ask for patience and understanding as we work our way through. So I will pause for a moment while our admins switch everybody into one common session.
Maybe some of the folks that have put in their answers in the Q&A that have not been answered yet can repost them now, right?
Absolutely. And what I'll do is I'll ask sort of one overarching question for everybody, and then ask folks to come back in with other questions as well. But I've been monitoring the Q&A on the side, and there's some great feedback. So I think we've got a lot of rich potential here to dig into. So as folks come in, I'm just going to ask one more question today, and then I'm just going to moderate the remainder and be the switchboard operator. How do we tackle the issues that have been raised today regarding limitations on innovation and at-scale adoption of new technologies? We've talked about connectors and requirements and clearly defined EOVs and global standards. What is our appetite? Do we have an appetite for a Global Ocean Observing Technology Forum where we collectively address these issues? Is there another means by which we start to tackle these as a collective? Do we parse pieces of them off and deal with them separately? There was a lot in our conversation and in the Q&A that teases into this. And so I ask folks just to pick up that thread and go in any direction you'd like to go.
Chris, those that have not quite gotten into the panelists, if they want to talk, they can raise hands. We can also allow them to talk as we're trying to convert them in as panelists.
Absolutely. Looks like
Catherine,
Catherine.
Go ahead. Catherine, you should be able to talk. Chris, I'm not sure, so we'll see if there's others. So Monica, I'm in host mode, but I'm unable to move folks into panelists. Are you able to move folks into panelists, Monica?
Yeah, they just have to accept it. So I've sent the request to everyone.
Oh, I see. Yeah, it's not a binary. Okay. So we're working through this technical issue. Sorry.
And I think Catherine's on now.
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yeah, go ahead, Catherine.
Hi. So I wanted to kind of piggyback over the last portion of the discussion. I heard everyone mentioning students and how to get students involved, but I figure with that, you're also missing a large swath of employees, specifically early careers. And I was wondering, do you and your companies think about how you're investing specifically in early career or young professionals so that they want to stay within your company and see upward mobility, instead of having to go to other opportunities to get to that next level?
Clara, go ahead.
An easy one, we absolutely do. I think that's really important to get early career professionals, so that hopefully they'll be there for the long term, because there's a high bar on ocean science knowledge. It takes a long time to become proficient in whatever technology you're working on. So that is our goal. We have intern programs for that reason, and we often hire our interns, so definitely.
Rob, and then Tost, go ahead.
Yeah, I would just add that retention is really important, particularly in this industry. As people have said, what we do is very hard. The application is very hard. It's similar to satellites in space. We're deploying these things for a long time in a very challenging environment. And so we really try and focus on finding people who have that passion for the mission. Because a lot of early in career technical people are used to moving around very quickly and jumping from one company to the next. So we certainly try and focus on giving people a career path and saying, if you stay with us, this is your opportunity to grow. But we find that if we can find those people who have that passion, that's sort of the secret ingredient that we really need to have good long-term retention and development.
I'm coordinating a EU-funded project called EuroSea on ocean observing and forecasting, and we have a task in there, particular target for the next generation. So we are developing a lot of material for early career students and even before students to take an oceanographic career and pointing out the opportunities that are coming. And I wouldn't say that we are solving the problem, but we are very targeted in trying to engage an increasing workforce that is needed.
Yi, and then Brad.
Yeah, that's a great question. I want to add not only the early careers, also for larger companies, I want to encourage you to approach even mid-career scientists, engineers in those institutions. People like myself, we don't have to wait until your retirement to join industry. It is a good career for many backgrounds, people to grow, and it's very rewarding. And there's a lot of people can write papers, and then if I leave the paper writing business, and still things going on, and need a lot of help in the industry to move the needle. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll do Brad, Katie, and Catherine. And for folks who have other questions, please raise your hand and we can layer those in as well. Brad, go ahead.
Yeah, hi, thanks for the opportunity. I think that one of the interesting and really exciting new developments in recent years has been the formalization and coordination of early career ocean professionals. And they're actually a UN Decade project. And they just have an enormous amount of energy and interest. And those are the people we're talking about here. Those are the people who want to engage and are interested, but they need help. They need help organizationally. So here's a space where one could help to expand their reach beyond their present capacity, but also engage them directly in this discussion instead of me as a gray-haired person saying what I think they should need, do or what they need, hearing directly from early career researchers and interested people, because they're right at the doorstep, but they need help to kind of enter. So I just encourage connection with that group.
Thanks, Brad. Katie and Catherine, go ahead.
I'll just bring it out to your question, Chris, about what we can do in terms of next steps. I think just hearing this conversation, it kind of reminds me of all the conversations that are in vogue at the moment around co-design. We spend a lot of time kind of in a tennis game between observations and modelers, between the observing system and our government and industry and things, about, well, what do you want and what do you need and what can we provide, and back and forth. Maybe we need to kind of have these more direct conversations. You talked about an ocean observing technology forum, but maybe going a little bit initially, identifying a few small tasks where we can bring together, maybe co-sponsored by Goose and MTS or other forums, identify some specific tasks to try and move the conversation forward tangibly on some of the issues that we've identified, rather than saying, right, let's build the palace and then try and fill it in. So I think Matt's raised and he's got his hand up, so he'll say a few things. The nature of the connections between our sensors and our platforms and working on things like that. There are just some specific issues, how we define requirements on the observing side in a way, and from the scientific side, in a way that is actionable and usable by industry to pick them up. Scientists don't necessarily, there's two different languages there, and we see that again with observations and models. It's two different languages. So I think just having those kind of joined up conversations at the start could be really, really useful. And I'm sure that lots of people, there's things in the chat, but maybe identifying one or two or three particular fundamental conversations that could be taken forward in a kind of task-oriented way. Spin up a task team, have the conversation, learn from it, and deliver the learnings on that. And maybe we can take it forward from there.
Yeah, it's a great point. Thanks, Katie. Catherine and then Matt.
Hello. I just got a response into the chat as well, but my name is Catherine Houtman. I'm at Analog Devices, and I'm running our new Ocean and Climate Innovation Accelerator. And I am an engineer, the thing I'm struggling with is I'm new to ocean science, and we're working with WHOI. I know Yi Chao talks to it a little bit, but what are those opportunities for people that are maybe mid-career, that have just started, that aren't going to leave school, go get a master's degree? How do you actually gain the expertise you need in order to be able to speak confidently at that bridge of oceanography and technology? So what's available, what funding might be available? A lot of people would have tuition reimbursement. Not everybody has, or even unemployed people that have been hunting for jobs. Like, how would they get on this track if they were interested?
I'll take the moderator's prerogative and put a shameless plug in there that professional societies like MTS and others around the world, work intently in this space on providing opportunity for early career ocean professionals, as Brad mentioned, but also early career folks across the spectrum of engineering and ocean sciences, both to network and connect and to move their career forward. So that's one option we can continue to build on. Again, I'm the moderator, so I get to say stuff like that. Matt, go ahead.
Hi, thanks. Yeah, it's Matt Moden from both Clearwater Sensors, a new startup, and I've also still working at the National Oceanography Centre, developing sensors and technology for years. I guess trying to bring it around to sort of actionable outcomes of the discussion, which has been excellent. I think one of the things that I see is we get these step changes in the use and design of technology when we have actual projects, actual uses of technology that get things wet with a stakeholder or a customer or a bunch of stakeholders and customers is even better. But enough of an incentive that there's going to be a future market that we're actually going to try and do a demonstration to see if that is live. And there are a couple of, there's always blocks to that. but there are always gaps and opportunities to fill those gaps. And my feeling is maybe we, rather than having another talking group or another discussion, maybe we need to have something a bit more concrete where the outcome is going to be a project. We're going to demonstrate a bunch of things that are going to move the state of the art on as an outcome, and try and coalesce some of the stakeholders and tech providers and users in that conversation. So I don't know if that's possible, but I would advocate that that could be done across transnational boundaries and over different disciplines. Actually, there's a lot of commonality between a lot of the ocean observing networks in terms of what they want to address in terms of missing EOVs or new capabilities. And I'll give you some example. I've talked to a couple of groups here that are present who want to integrate new capability onto their platforms, but they need a stakeholder, a customer, and a tech provider to enable that to happen. And they can't just fund it themselves on a wish. They need those things to be lined up. And this group seems to be full of the right ingredients to make that good salad.
Here, and then Graham.
Yeah, thank you very much, Matt. Good point. I think, first of all, we should continue this exchange that we have started today. I think we only scratched the surface here, and we did not go into this detail of standardization. And yes, it was discussed before, but times change. And I think we are on the verge here. We are growing, and this is the key point, right? We should have a common perspective. We should have a common goal where we would like to see ocean observing go. And that was the ambition in that background paper, right? This ocean observing enterprise to become matured, to become muscular and basically become a standalone almost market besides the other blue economies. This is where we should strive towards to get more attention in. And in that respect, I can only motivate the research community to further follow their path with respect to that harmonization, standardization, EUVs. That is so important to simplify that world that we are in. And I also want to stress in that respect this internationality that we touched upon. It is so important that, and that's why EUVs are so important, because they go beyond the national boundaries, and that is so helpful in our discipline, where we on the research vessels have anyway many people from many countries on board. So that aspect is crucial. And the third aspect is lighthouse projects. Argo is an excellent example of something that could only be done through the collaboration between industry and science. It is further an excellent example on how, for example, units price dropped by the time a larger amount of vehicles was required, etc., etc. And that generates some momentum by itself. And Seabed 2030 would be another example that has stimulated a lot of investments as well. I mean, this is fueling sales of bathymetric equipment, and this is something that we just need to identify, and that could be something to follow up as well. A suggestion in that respect would be to develop something like Seabed 2030 for organisms and ecosystems. Right? If the vessels go out, why not map in 4D for life in the ocean? Just as an example for an ambitious idea.
Thanks, Pierre. Graham.
Yeah, I'd like to again support the comments that have been made by the last two speakers. I think that anchoring things around projects, and I've done one in the past with Matt and the team down at NOC, that have to be of scale. They have to try and do something meaningful. They've got to try and draw through a demonstration. If they can be transnational, possibly so much better for collaboration purposes. But we haven't talked about too much about trying to mirror best practice in other sectors. And is there a way where national funding perhaps might work in a sort of more perhaps DASA in a UK sense, or DARPA, the kind of sort of defence accelerator research programs, which make perhaps open calls. Industry can go to government with an, let's say I have a brilliant idea. I can go to government, almost like a research institute, but I might need to partner with somebody to do it. Trying to build those projects and actually putting some space in there to just have some open call or some stated national objective where there's a gap, or the research community have identified a gap, make an open call for that gap and get some teams going for it, and drive these collaborations via projects. I can't support that. Yeah, that gives the experience to people. It's a very it's a fantastic technique for gearing the whole system. The researchers, the industrialists, the scientists, and overall the ultimate result that we're trying, we might be trying to get to for ocean observing. That's me.
Excellent, thank you. Venkat and then Natalie.
Thank you, Pierre, and thanks a lot. And I joined with Pierre for what he said, and there could be a project or a role model that can be developed as an outcome of this discussion. We have all experts from NOAA and Goose and industry who are assembled here. Maybe an outcome could be evolved. Maybe Chris can develop that in the end. Maybe down the line, maybe 1 or 2 years after the Oceans 2022, we can develop a cost-effective, robust new system which can be a role model for anybody to use that. Because now we have the observing community is very limited. If you look at it on the island communities, island nations, out of 25 large island nations, not even 6 of them have got like that. If you look at it, how do you expand? That's main impediment here is the cost and also sustaining it, as it was told about human capital. So considering all these things, how do this forum can look at in a larger level, develop a system which should be cost effective, that could be a role model for others to follow. I think that will be a great beginning for us to continue this discussion, continues to work together in a larger perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Venkat. Natalie.
Yes, I very much like this idea of best practices and case studies. So why not using the existing international observing networks for doing this? So the structure is already in place. There are issues. We've talked a lot about Argo. Argo has its own ways that it could be improved. There's definitely room for improvement. So why not just having the public institutions in the industry having an honest conversation about what's needed and how to resolve the issues. And the goal would be to define best practices, a model that other observing networks could follow. And that has to do with technology development, the availability. I talked about this earlier. There's not enough funds for technology development, even where there's a need from the academic institutions. There's not enough funds coming. There's no funds coming from the industry almost. It has to come from the academic institutions through the NOP, and there's not a lot of opportunities for doing that. There's a strong issue of the cost of the sensors and platforms. Something that we haven't talked about is that in a lot of cases, the observing network budgets are leveled. There's not a lot of hope for very strong investments from the funding agencies. And also, I think there needs to be a better communication between the funding agencies and the industries about providing forecasts, if you will, predictions about what the funding will be in the next few years and how the industry could prepare for it. You know, if Deep Argo is about to ramp up, I think the industry should know about it and should be ready for it.
Great point, Natalie. Graham.
Yeah, I'm just trying to readdress the funding position. Is it time to take a look at something slightly different, if possible, to the traditional funding agency methods? And by this, I mean that there are other, looking at best practice again in other sectors around the world. There's an interesting thing happening down in Brazil in the oil and gas industry, where the ANP take a 1% levy on the oil production there, which has to be rediverted by those earning the revenue into science, technology, and capability generation within Brazil. Can that type of thing be promoted, at a governmental level, wishful thinking, attempting to try and promote that type of thinking to try and get money targeted at answering these climate-related questions from ocean observing could be an approach to take. it's another edge of this, a very, very high level edge of it, but nonetheless, it's a question about how do we get money into the system to enable the science to be done. And it's not just the normal traditional governmental science. Perhaps it needs to be lobbied or pressured in some way.
Thanks, Graham. For everyone, we've got about 20 minutes left. If there's questions that either our panelists or our attendees want to ask of the group or of specifics, please do raise your hand and we can get them in. Matt, go ahead.
So I just pick up on the, we talked about it quite a bit, about the integration of platforms and sensors. And there's been a big community trying to work on that for a very long time. And I think it's still not very well resolved. And there's still a barrier for both platform producers and sensor producers to do that, because the interfaces aren't standard, and actually standardizing them is very problematic, because generally they're quite tailored to the specific role that the platform or the sensor has. So for example, Argo, very, very low power, has to be very minimal interface compared to, say, a large high power AUV that's going to have to deal with high power sonar systems and all the rest of it, right? They're going to need much more data. So again, it would seem sensible to identify if anybody has common sensor platform pairings, and whether we could work through that space and minimize the number of different standards. But maybe we do need to have a bit more plurality in that system to unblock that problem. And we've got a lot of platforms and sensor pairs that currently can't work and don't work just because of this issue. They would work physically and electrically and all the rest of it.
Duncan, and then Pierre.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. That's a really good point. SOFAR's developed a kind of an open connectivity standard called Bristlemouth. We're publishing all the documentation on that. It uses kind of commercially available communication technology that's really common in the automobile industry. The idea is anyone is going to be able to take the standard and build a sensor that's going to be able to communicate over that standard. So I will paste the link to Bristlemouth in the chat. We've used it in a technology solution that we've built for the Aqualink network, which is a globally distributed, privately funded network of sensor systems for monitoring heat stress on coral reefs. So we've developed that system. We've built that entire network, which is hundreds of nodes sending remote temperature data from different coral reefs. And it's going to be open to sensor developers. Yeah, very soon.
Thanks, Duncan. Pierre, and then Doug.
Yeah, a question to the some folks here. So can, through the consolidation of orders, some of that standardization be enforced? I mean, if you said we are only going to buy the next 500 platforms of that or that type, if these or if the sensors are connected through this or that hardware and software connection. I mean, there is some lever that the purchasers have in that respect, and maybe you need to use that enforcement. I might cut my own finger here now, but I sense that this is an inhibitor to ongoing growth. Like, look at the USB standard or the CD standard that we had. Some of you might remember mini discs and all the other things we had back in the day, right? So I think let's make use of the fact that that there is still a lot of room for consolidation, and that through consolidated orders there is the potential to enforce some of these things. That use that force on your end.
Thanks, Pierre. Doug, and then Emma.
Hi. I know many of you in for many things, but I'm sort of representing
IOCARIB here in this, and we just had endorsed a new decade project to develop a ocean observing system for the tropical Atlantic and Caribbean. It's kind of a spin-off of work that I've done, in fact, in the past for IOCARIB GOOS. But I just wanted to emphasize the unique needs of ocean observing in developing economies in small island states. And many of you I've worked with in this, and Venkat in particular has just brought it up, but it just is really something that needs to be considered. It's being considered more, and I commend the SOFAR and what Brian Glazer's doing with his new water level network, and probably half a dozen other things that I can't mention here. But it's just really important that people start looking with that perspective instead of the developed economy, global observing systems. It's local, it's relatively inexpensive. Because it's local and coastal, there needs to be more, and they need to be operated by, in general, we try to build capacity, but you still do not have the capacity that other countries have. And so, again, it's coming up more and more, and I'm grateful for that, but I wanted to emphasize it.
Thank you, Doug. Emma, go ahead.
Thanks very much. So my perspective is from the Global Ocean Observing System. I support the Global Ocean Observing System. And some of the questions here are fundamental to the networks that we work with and the systems. And I think the discussion has been fantastic. And certainly there are things coming up that that I can see can be acted upon unilaterally, such as promoting reports and sort of, market quantification and some organization that could, be explored. But I want to bring up a point that you raised earlier, Chris. You said, what can we learn from other sectors, that we could maybe use? Because I think looking at some of these conversations, maybe around, interfaces, plug and play, standardization of technology, that discussion doesn't lie solely with the Global Ocean Observing System or ocean observers per se. This requires an ongoing dialogue in some sort of a way. And we can certainly look and do some things through projects. And again, this is an interesting idea of collaboration. But my question perhaps to some of the people in the panel, some of the industry people in the panel is there's an example in WMO. They have a kind of an industry technology forum, I think sort of annually. And you can obviously look and produce strands of conversations to focus on and to speak across industry sectors and maybe do some of this liaising about market size and things like that. But this would, this is a commitment of companies to this as a marketplace and to moving it forward. Does the panel feel that the commitment would be there to work with the observing sector and to work on issues over a longer period, over a couple of years, and to convene to tackle some of these strands if we identify them clearly and come to sort of conclusions over the longer term there?
Thanks for that question, Rob, go ahead.
So yeah, enthusiastic yes to that, Emma. And I think the key for industry is the more we can approach this from a global perspective, the more effective it's going to be. But yeah, those of us in the industry know the importance of long-term, where there's long-term time series, that this is something that, it's a big rock to move, to given the QA/QC and the challenges of the application in general. And so we know that it requires long-term commitments and long-term conversations to get things moving. And yes, absolutely interesting from from our viewpoint to start those types of dialogues.
Graham.
Again, I'd echo Rob's comments. It'd be a yes from me. I wasn't aware of the WMO piece. It's a sort of different world, but of a transfer of an idea that's worked in a different marketplace would seem sensible. Many of the companies here have spent 1, 2, 5, 10, 25, 50 years developing market positions, supporting science and working in different spaces. If we need to do something when we get around the table, then yes.
Thanks, Graham. David.
Yeah, just again, totally agree with Graham and Rob's comments, and yes, would definitely be on board with that. I think the one of the components of that we shouldn't miss is kind of what I alluded to earlier, is that we don't want to just talk about technology. We want to eventually we need to get down to some specifics, and because the discussion will very early in the process diverge between whether you're talking about working on the surface of the ocean, working on the bottom of the ocean, working somewhere in the middle of the ocean, working in a moving platform or drifting, and if you all of a sudden you try to group all of that together into a huge technology discussion, it's just not going to get anywhere. And so we need to have these avenues to be split in. I think we've talked enough about it that we could probably almost jump right into those already. But if there's something, so certainly 100% on board with that level of discussion carrying forward, but we would need to make it efficient, and so that we can get stuff out of it done. We need to sort of really split it up fairly early in the process into the to one of these particular areas, rather than just grouping and talking about ocean technology.
Thanks, David. Clara.
So that's another enthusiastic yes. Absolutely, we need specifics. We don't want to go down rabbit holes. You know how quickly that can happen. We need to know end use, and then absolutely, we're completely on board.
Thank you. Here.
Another quick idea. How about packaging of solutions? We have the EUVs, which is very good. But looking at, for example, WMO and how the weather data is collected, maybe we should also come up with some recommendations of which parameters should be combined and what a recommendable package would be with respect to parameters and platforms, and basically make suggestions in this respect for regions, countries to join. And in that respect, we have that 10x issue of shall we start with high quality sensors, or shall we start with large number lower quality sensors? And I mean, if we look at a large electric car manufacturer and how they have built up their recent success, they have started with the expensive vehicle, right? To get some traction, to get the quality right, and get in some money before they rolled out the units for everybody. And we are not there yet. Our environment is not mature enough. We do not have, through all the parameters, heavily industrialized sensors. We predominantly have them solely for the ones that are used in other blue economy sectors, and not for all of the parameters that are used within ocean observing. So that's why I advocate for let's try to get the thing bigger, and then the numbers will come, and then the price will drop, and then a more wider application of the units, platform sensor combinations can be seen.
Thanks, Pierre. All right, Melinda, you are our last participant for this block, and then we're going to move into a closeout. So please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I also want to agree with everyone else. We would definitely be interested, but kind of looping it back to, we talk about setting these standards and goals. And I guess the question I have is, who is we? I've attended a number of seminars and meetings on the need for data standards and sensor standards and all these requirements. But what fails to come out of it is, who will the decision maker be, and where will the funding come from for these continued meetings to actually set these standards, get an agreement and publicize it and move forward.
That's a great point. Thank you. So thank you, everyone, panelists and attendees, for your engagement and for great conversation today. I know we could go on for many, many more hours, and I appreciate the focused nature of how we address things today. It's been a pleasure to chat with you. I thank you for all your patience as we work through this first dialogue. I invite Stenka Willis to discuss next steps in our series of dialogues and to close today's conversation. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And Melinda, I will note we did not answer your question. And it is one of those that we will, look at to address as we move forward. So I also just want to echo Chris's thanks to each and every one of you, both from the panelists and the open slots and the absolutely amazingly robust conversation. And for those of our colleagues who are not in the Northern Hemisphere or even Europe, for those of you who are, it's the middle of the night, thank you so much for staying with us. It's really very important. So the question is, so what happens from here? In the tactical perspective, all of this information that you've provided will be turned into a short report focused on the recommendations and the conversations around those recommendations, and each and every one of you will have a chance to interact with that report, and we will get that out to you in short order in the next week, because we will then, so that's the first thing, we want to get that wrapped up. And so how does this relate to dialogues 2, 3, and 4? So the information that we've learned today, we have a kind of a case study for each of the dialogues that the participants were able to see. It gives Chris a guidance as he moderates. We will take a look at some of the topics that we touched on today and reflect those in our second dialogue to see if there needs to be some adjustments to that. And then we will host these first 4 dialogues, the second one being in October, and then the third one in November, and the fourth one in December. At the end of all of this, as we synthesize both the report and the background paper we've put together, we will then embark next year on a series of discussions at both appropriate ocean venues and non-ocean venues to be able to figure out how we can actually bring action to the recommendations that we have come up with. Probably not every recommendation we come up with, what that, as Katie said, kind of focus in on some of those early ones where we can then figure out how to actually translate that into actions. So that's kind of where our plan is. I'm going to make one plug, the conversation on the early career ocean professional. We within the Marine Technology Society fully support what has been said about the early career ocean professionals. And so much so that a year ago, I guess 2 years ago now, we actually have a vice president for early career ocean professionals on our board. So we wanted to make sure that voice was there. We also have a global early career ocean professional section. So any of those of you who have are either in your early career ocean professional stage or have those folks working for you, we'd love to have them engaged. And they are helping us to come up with new ways in which the Marine Technology Society can actually be relevant as we move forward. So a shameless plug for the MTS. And Monica, if you can bring up the final slide. These types of activities, as Monica brings it up, these types of activities don't happen with, okay, I'm not quite seeing the slide. I think it'll come up. I'm hoping as I tap dance here. But these types of activities don't happen all by themselves. As I said, this is a joint effort between the Global Ocean Observing System, the Marine Technology Society, and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and it is a recognized UN decade. here is the organizing committee. We have tried very, very hard to, really figure out how to facilitate this conversation, put together curated questions, had a lot of conversations around that. So my final is one to absolutely give Chris Ostrander a big round of applause. He has, I think, done a marvelous job in facilitating this. I know he's taken a lot of time to embrace the case study that we gave him and really focus in on the questions in the short period of time. So I really want to thank you, Chris. And with that, I think that it will be time for me to close this. And please, for those of you who participated today, provide us feedback on what you thought of this, how we can do this better. My email is pretty easy, president@mtsociety.org. And happy to take all of your comments and questions for how to make this better for the next 3. So with that, we will close this, and I will say, goodbye to everybody. Thank you very much.
Bye, everybody.